Imagine, just for a second, that you are wandering into this bustling, noisy city square in early 19th century Europe.
Right, lots of people, cobblestones, the whole scene.
Exactly. The year is 1828. You're walking along, and right there, just sort of stumbling through the crowds, is a teenage boy.
And he's clutching this really mysterious letter in his hand.
Yeah, and when he can finally, string enough words together to communicate, he looks at the authorities and claims he has spent his entire life locked in a pitch-black dungeon.
It's just wild. And almost overnight, this random boy becomes the most famous person in all of Europe.
You've just met Kaspar Hauser, and for this deep dive, you and I are going to tear apart this 200-year-old true crime phenomenon.
It's such a fascinating case. We're going to be looking at historical records, decades of psychological evaluations, and even some cutting-edge 2024 DNA analysis.
Right. Our mission is to basically construct the true biographical narrative of Europe's most famous foundling.
And we aren't just looking at who this boy actually was.
Yep.
The core of this story is really about, well, why his bizarre claims captivated the entire world.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate 19th century viral sensation.
Totally. It's a study of humanity's deep, almost irrational desire to believe in fairy tales. And it's also a look at how modern science has finally managed to, dissect a 2-century-old legend.
To understand the sheer scale of the myth, we have to start with the inciting incident, the day this walking enigma literally stumbled into the public eye.
Right, May 26, 1828, in Nuremberg, Germany.
So a local shoemaker spots this teenager wandering around looking completely lost, right? And he takes him to a military commander.
And the boy is carrying these two highly unusual letters. The first one is completely anonymous.
Yeah, it claims to be from a caretaker living on the Bavarian border, and it's addressed to a local cavalry captain.
The author claims to have raised this boy in absolute, strict isolation since 1812.
He taught him to read and write a tiny bit, but supposedly never let him take a single step outside the house.
And the letter ends by inviting the captain to either give the boy a job in the cavalry or, and this is crazy, just hang him.
Hang him? That is quite the introduction.
Yeah, it really is. And the second letter adds a whole other layer of intrigue to it all.
Right. It was supposedly written by the boy's mother, addressed to that anonymous caretaker.
It stated the boy's name was Kaspar, that he was born in 1812, and that his father was a cavalryman who had passed away.
And when he first appeared, his behavior seemed to completely validate this extreme backstory.
Oh, absolutely. He possessed a shockingly limited vocabulary.
Mostly, he just cried, repeated a single phrase about wanting to be a cavalryman like his father, and shouted the word for horse.
So unable to get any basic answers out of him, the Nuremberg authorities simply assumed he was a vagrant. They just locked him in the local jail.
But once he is sitting in that jail, he supposedly starts learning to communicate better.
And that is when he drops the absolute bombshell that turns him into a continental celebrity.
He tells the dungeon tale. He claims he had lived his entire life in a tiny, pitch-black cell.
He survived solely on bread and water that he would magically find sitting next to his bed every single morning.
And he layered in these highly cinematic, almost gothic details, right?
Yeah. He claimed that occasionally the water would taste bitter. And whenever that happened, he'd fall into this profoundly deep sleep.
And when he eventually woke up, he would find that his hair and his nails had been neatly trimmed.
Exactly. He swore he never saw a single human face until the very end of his captivity.
Right. When a masked man suddenly appeared, taught him how to walk, taught him to write his own name, and then basically dragged him out and dumped him in Nuremberg.
Which is a brilliant story. But
I have to stop and push back on this. Yeah. Because the physical reality of the human body makes that story entirely impossible.
Oh, scientifically, it makes no sense.
Right. If you actually spend 16 years locked in a cramped, lightless box, your body doesn't just pause.
No, you are completely deprived of vitamin D. You're going to develop severe rickets.
Exactly, meaning your bones soften and literally bend under your own weight. You'd have massive skin issues and muscle atrophy.
But observers at the time explicitly noted he had a completely healthy facial complexion.
Plus, when they moved him out of the jail cell and put him in the castle tower under a jailer's care, he was able to easily climb 90 steps up to his room.
Yeah, you do not effortlessly climb 90 stairs if your leg muscles haven't been used for 16 years.
So why did anyone believe him?
Well, the physical contradiction was glaring, but you have to look at this through the lens of 19th century European culture.
Ah, the Romantic era.
Precisely. This was the height of the Romantic era. Society was utterly obsessed with the philosophical concept of the noble savage.
Which is this idea of a pure, uncorrupted child of nature who hasn't been tainted by modern civilization.
Right. So when Kaspar spun this dungeon narrative, the public just willfully ignored the obvious lack of rickets or muscle atrophy.
The romantic narrative was just too appealing. They wanted a blank slate to marvel at, I guess.
They really did. So the authorities freed him from jail, formally adopted him as a ward of the city, and citizens eagerly donated money to support him.
But because the city adopts him, they decide he needs an education. And this is where his life gets truly bizarre.
Yeah, this is where the massive cracks in his story really start to show.
He's placed in the care of a schoolmaster and speculative philosopher named Friedrich Dahmer.
And Dahmer wasn't just teaching him reading and writing. He saw Kaspar as the ultimate test subject for the trendy alternative treatments of the era.
Right, specifically things like homeopathy and animal magnetism.
Animal magnetism is a concept that definitely requires a bit of context today.
Please explain, because it sounds crazy.
Well, in the 1820s, it wasn't just considered a parlor trick. It was a prevailing pseudoscientific belief that an invisible, fluid-like life force flowed through all living things.
Okay, so kind of like an energy field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And practitioners believed this fluid could be manipulated or balanced using literal magnets.
So Dahmer would point the North Pole of a magnet at Kaspar, right?
Yeah, and Kaspar would react wildly. He claimed he could physically feel currents of air pulling at his stomach or flushing through his body.
Wait, he's claiming a hunk of metal is physically pulling at his internal organs like a vacuum.
That's what he said.
It sounds completely absurd, but he's basically telling the adults exactly what they want to hear.
Totally. He becomes this living marvel for the local intelligentsia.
But, you know, you can only play the miracle child for so long before the novelty wears off.
And eventually, his caretakers start catching him in lies, and the honeymoon phase ends violently.
Right. In October 1829, Kaspar is found down in the cellar of Dahmer's house, bleeding from a cut on his forehead.
He tells everyone that a hooded man, the exact same man who brought him to Nuremberg, ambushed him in the outhouse and threatened to kill him.
So the city goes into an absolute panic. They assign him a permanent police escort and transfer him to a new household run by a municipal authority named Johann Bieberbach.
But skeptics were already reviewing the evidence from the Dahmer house.
Because prior to the attack, Kaspar and Dahmer had actually been arguing frequently.
Yes, Dahmer was catching him in numerous deceptions, and the blood trail at the scene was highly suspicious.
Yeah, it suggested Kaspar hadn't been attacked in the outhouse at all, but rather went to his own room, cut himself with a razor, and then deliberately hid in the cellar to stage the scene.
Which is a classic escalation tactic. If you ever dealt with a compulsive liar, you know they tend to escalate when they are cornered.
And it happens again. By April 1830, a pistol goes off in his new room at the Bieberbach house.
Right. His armed escorts rush through the door, and there is Kaspar bleeding from a superficial head wound.
His excuse this time, he claims he stood on a chair to reach a book, lost his balance, and just happened to grab a loaded gun hanging on the wall to steady himself.
Which magically went off and grazed him.
Right, of course. But the timing is the giveaway here.
The Bieberbach family had just been harshly scolding him for his constant lying. Mrs. Bieberbach was entirely fed up.
She actually documented his extreme vanity and what she called his horrendous mendacity.
And the Baron who took him in immediately afterward echoed the exact same complaints about his exorbitant vanity.
It really makes me think about the cognitive hardware of a modern social media influencer, you know?
How do you mean?
Like an influencer whose engagement metrics are tanking or who just got caught in a massive scandal, what do?
They manufacture a dramatic personal crisis.
Exactly. They post a crying video from a hospital bed to immediately deflect criticism and farm sympathy.
That is a brilliant analogy. It's the exact same psychological hardware, just playing out in 1829.
He is manufacturing life-threatening drama to avoid being held accountable for his lies.
And a 1970 psychiatric analysis reviewed all of these historical accounts and came to that exact conclusion.
Oh, really? What did they say?
The psychiatrist noted that a child raised in the sensory deprivation Kaspar described would be profoundly disabled, not a functioning, articulate teenager capable of complex social manipulation.
Right. The clinical diagnosis offered was a histrionic and paranoid personality disorder.
Exactly. People with histrionic personality disorder have this overwhelming pathological need to be the center of attention.
They display rapidly shifting, shallow emotions and will go to extreme lengths, including self-harm, just to maintain the spotlight.
So he wasn't a wild child at all. He was a highly capable swindler with the paranoid persistence to keep the role going.
But when you play a long con, you eventually burn through your audience. He alienates all of his German caretakers. The fame is drying up.
And for someone with a histrionic personality, irrelevance is basically a fate worse than death. He desperately needs a new mark.
And he finds one in a wealthy British nobleman named Lord Stanhope, who arrives in 1831 and officially takes custody.
Stanhope is completely taken by the mystery. He promises Kaspar a life of luxury and a move to England.
He even funds 2 separate, very expensive trips to Hungary.
Right, because Kaspar suddenly claimed he remembered some Hungarian words and might actually be related to a wealthy Hungarian countess.
Imagine you are Lord Stanhope. You are pouring thousands of pounds into this kid. You drag him all the way to Hungary. You stand him in front of castles and monuments.
And nothing happens.
Nothing. Kaspar doesn't recognize a single building or a single person.
A local Hungarian nobleman who observed him even noted how absurd and theatrical his behavior was.
You'd finally realize you've been entirely played.
Which is exactly what Stanhope realizes. He knows he has been duped, and it is deeply embarrassing for a man of his stature.
So he effectively dumps Kaspar in a town called Ansbach, placing him with a very strict, pedantic teacher named Meyer.
Stanhope basically stops visiting, though he does continue to pay the living expenses.
So Kaspar goes from being the toast of high society, performing magnetic parlor tricks for philosophers, to sitting in a cold room working as a lowly law copyist.
Yeah, he's doing menial administrative copying work all day, and he absolutely hates it.
He needs Stanhope's attention back. He needs that ticket to England. So in December 1833, he makes his final fatal move.
Kaspar and his strict teacher, Meyer, have a severe argument. Stanhope is actually scheduled to visit the town for Christmas.
And Meyer makes it crystal clear that he plans to tell the Lord exactly how terrible Kaspar's behavior has been.
Right. So 5 days after this argument, Kaspar stumbles back to the house. He has a deep stab wound to his chest.
And he spins another wildly dramatic tale. He claims a stranger lured him into the local court garden, handed him a purse, and then stabbed him.
And even as he is bleeding, Kaspar is oddly obsessed with making sure the local police go out to the garden to find this purse he left behind.
Which is such a red flag. So the police search the garden and find a small violet purse.
And inside is a note written in pencil. But the note is in mirror writing, meaning the text is reversed, and you have to hold it up to a glass to read it.
The vague message claims the attacker was from the Bavarian border, but the investigators immediately spot several massive flaws in the forgery.
Oh, absolutely. If you think about the cognitive load of trying to write backward in a mirror, it makes perfect sense why he was caught.
You are focusing so hard on the physical shapes of the letters that your brain just has no processing power left to police your grammar.
Exactly. You completely default to your subconscious ingrained habits.
So Kaspar successfully mirrored the letters, but he accidentally included spelling and grammatical errors that were entirely unique to his specific way of speaking.
And beyond the grammatical trap, there was a physical clue as well.
Right, the fold of the paper.
Yes. The note was folded into a highly specific triangular shape. According to his teacher's wife, this was the exact idiosyncratic way Kaspar always folded his personal letters.
Wow. He essentially signed his own forged ransom note.
He really did. Both contemporary investigators and a modern forensic analysis published in 2005 reached the exact same consensus.
Kaspar stabbed himself. The goal was to play the victim, revive his fading celebrity, and guilt Lord Stanhope into taking him away from the strict teacher.
But he miscalculated the depth of the blade.
It's just a grim irony. He was a lifelong con artist who used self-harm to manipulate the adults around him, and his ultimate stunt just went too far.
3 days later, at the age of 21, Kaspar Hauser died from the self-inflicted wound.
You would think that bleeding out from a staged attack would finally close the book on this kid.
You would think so, yeah.
But for the public, a deeply disturbed teenager accidentally killing himself was just too boring. So the mystery mutated into a massive conspiracy theory.
The public flat out refused to let go of the fantasy. A rumor began circulating that Kaspar wasn't just a random foundling.
He was actually the rightful hereditary Prince of Baden,
Right.
which was a very powerful German state.
Yes, according to this hereditary prince theory, the true infant prince, who was born in 1812, was swapped at birth with a dying commoner baby.
And the details of this conspiracy are just wild. It claimed the baby swap was orchestrated by the boy's step-grandmother.
Right, who supposedly disguised herself as a ghost called the White Lady to sneak into the royal nursery.
She then hid the real prince in a dungeon for 16 years until he emerged in Nuremberg.
And naturally, the theory framed his stabbing in Anne's back not as a botched suicide, but as a royal assassination to prevent him from claiming the throne.
It's a gripping narrative, I'll give it that, but it was completely baseless.
Utterly baseless.
Yeah.
By the 1870s, historians had uncovered official state documents showing that the real royal baby's tragic death was witnessed by numerous people.
Yeah, his father, his grandmother, his aunt, and like 10 different court physicians. Swapping a baby under the eyes of a dozen royals and doctors is literally impossible.
Yet people ignored those historical documents, and the myth persisted well into the 21st century.
It took cutting-edge genetic science to finally put a stop to it. In 2024, researchers utilized a technique called massive parallel sequencing.
Right, they used it on samples definitively linked to Kaspar, including blood from his clothing.
Massive parallel sequencing is amazing because it allows scientists to read millions of tiny fragmented DNA strands simultaneously.
Which is exactly what you need when dealing with degraded 200-year-old evidence. They extracted his mitochondrial DNA.
And mitochondrial DNA is incredibly useful for historical cold cases because it is passed down almost entirely unchanged through the maternal line.
Exactly. So the scientists sequenced Kaspar's specific genetic signature, his haplotype, and compared it directly with the living descendants of the House of Baden.
The result was a definitive non-match.
The genetic lineage completely ruled out any possibility that Kaspar Hauser was the missing prince.
And if that DNA evidence wasn't enough, medical historians made another massive discovery just a year prior in 2023.
Oh yeah, they went back and thoroughly re-examined the original autopsy and police reports.
And they realized that Kaspar actually had a cowpox vaccination scar on his arm.
The implications of that scar are just devastating to his entire narrative.
Because in early 19th century Bavaria, the smallpox vaccination was indeed mandatory.
But to receive it, you didn't just get a visit from a local doctor. You had to physically stand in line at a public health vaccination site.
And crucially, as a child, you had to be accompanied by a recognized adult.
You cannot claim to have spent your entire life in uncontacted, pitch-black isolation if you were literally standing in line at a busy Bavarian public health clinic with an adult chaperone.
The dungeon story is biologically impossible. The attacks were staged. The ransom note was forged by his own hand. The DNA proves he wasn't royalty. And the vaccine scar proves he was out in public as a child.
It's case closed.
So with all of that evidence, why did society hold on to this royal ghost story for almost 2 centuries?
It really just comes back to the psychology of myth-making. People simply prefer a thrilling, romantic mystery over a mundane, slightly depressing truth.
That makes sense. The idea of a lost prince hidden away by an evil step-grandmother feels like a fairy tale.
Right, whereas the reality that Kaspar was likely an intellectually capable but pathologically deceitful teenager who ran away from a modest home and lied constantly for attention is just sad.
Society collectively chose the narrative that inspired them, rather than accepting the facts that disappointed them. But what fascinates me is that even though science has definitively unmasked him as a fraud, his legacy remains incredibly powerful.
Oh, without a doubt. His lies accidentally created a cultural and scientific footprint that we still use today.
He became an enduring archetype. In literature and film, creators across generations used Kaspar as a symbol of the pure, natural innocent who is inevitably destroyed by a corrupt, overly rational society.
Yeah, Herman Melville referenced him as a symbol of a primitive, virtuous soul. Werner Herzog directed an acclaimed 1974 film exploring his alienation.
And his name is literally immortalized in scientific terminology. Today, researchers in biology and linguistics use the term Kaspar Hauser experiment.
Right, this refers to studies where animals are reared in total isolation from their own species.
Basically to determine which of their behaviors are strictly innate and which are learned from their environment.
And when they apply it to human language acquisition, it relates to analyzing severe language deprivation.
His entire life was a complete fabrication, yet he inadvertently provided the framework for humanity to debate the concepts of nature versus nurture.
We started this journey with a stumbling teenager in a Nuremberg square in 1828, armed with nothing but forged letters and a captivating lie.
We watched him manipulate the greatest intellectuals of his day, stage elaborate physical attacks to maintain his fame, and ultimately cause his own tragic death when his final con went too far.
And it took until the modern DNA labs of 2024 to finally, definitively close the case on Europe's most famous foundling.
It leaves you with something pretty heavy to mull over long after this deep dive ends. If a single teenager with absolutely no resources could fool the greatest minds of his era and spark a two-century conspiracy theory using nothing but his imagination and our desperate desire to believe in fairy tales, what modern myths are you completely falling for right now just because you prefer a good story over the facts?